それでは皆様、ここからは基調講演を始めさせていただきます。講師をご紹介します。フランソワ・ミッテラン元フランス大統領特別補佐官、欧州復興開発銀行の初代総裁など要職を歴任。1998年に発展途上国支援の NGO ポジティブプラネットを創設されましたジャック・アタリさんです。テーマはポジティブエコノミー、グローバルな利他主義の視点から国際平和について考えるです。それでは皆様、大きな拍手でお迎えください。ジャック・アタリさんです。 Please welcome Mr. Jack Attali.
Thank you very much, Mr. Governor. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to speak here, and I would mainly speak about the risks and possibility of wars ahead of us and the need for a positive economy to get positive peace in the future. There is no better place to speak about peace and war than here, and of course it's a great honor for me to be in this place and to remember the horrific tragedy that happened here some decades ago, at a moment also where everywhere in Europe, in the world, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War, which is going to be next week in Europe. 2 world wars. Are we going to face one day during the 21st century a 3rd world war? What are the chances to avoid it? Can we avoid it? What positive economy can do to avoid it? That's what I'm going to talk about. The idea of a universal and definitive peace has always been a major utopia for mankind, and since more than 25 centuries, philosophers, thinkers, politicians have written a lot of text, essays, draft of treaties about how to establish universal and definitive peace. As we know, it never worked. We never had definitive peace. We never had real peace forever, and we don't know exactly what a recipe could be for peace worldwide. We should also remember that war is not only a war between 2 nations. There are also other forms of wars, war of man against women, wars of mankind against other species, wars about mankind against nature, wars of violence at work or violence in the civil society. Wars is not only a diplomatic issue or a military issue, it's much larger than that. As we speak today, many people believe or explain that we have never been so close to a global peace than today. And it's true that if we look at many global statistics on many issues, it is true that the status of violence is lower than ever. A lot of famous statisticians, economists, university professors have written about it, and we all know these statistics. If we compare the number of violent deaths as a ratio of global population, as we speak, it is the lowest in mankind history. Not only violence in terms of wars. Actually, as we speak, there's not a lot of wars around the world. official wars, but also other kind of violent wars, of violent deaths, such as terrorism, which is very low, actually. Death by crimes or death by other violent sources are lower than ever, and even very, very low compared to what it was in the 16th century, 17th century, and in the century just behind us. We also see that a lot of progress are made in different fields that are related to the danger of violence. Very often we say that the roots of violence, the root of wars, are linked to scarcity, to hunger, to poverty, to illness, to lack of culture, to lack of freedom. And it is a fact also that the number of absolute poor in the world is very high, 1 billion, but as a ratio of global population, it is much lower than it was 20 or 30 years ago. It's a huge progress in the reduction of global poverty, of absolute poverty, in relative terms. It's also true that hunger has been reduced, that illness has been reduced, that infant mortality has been reduced, that many issues related to women mortality around birth has also been reduced, that life expectancy is growing, that the number of people who can't read is reduced. And also one factor which is clearly seen as a factor of peace, democracy, is, as we speak, or as we could have spoken 2 or 3 years ago, growing. By the way, there is something which is quasi-true, almost true, if not very true, is the fact that there has been no wars, never, and I've never seen a clear example of a country, between two democracies. Democracies do not fight each other. There are some rare examples, counter-examples that we can cite, but globally, we may say that if the world was only composed of democratic nations, there would be no war. And it's also linked to the fact that you have more wars when people are thinking that their life doesn't worth a lot. And it's true when life expectancy is low, people are less eager to defend their life because they know that their life will be short. It's why when life expectancy is growing as it is today, we may see that there are good reasons for people to try to avoid to die, and to die by war, or even to die by sacrifice. And it's why we see that in the different behavior of armies today, there is this idea that the death of a soldier is not seen as something which is normal as it is in war, but the death of a soldier or a civilian is always a tragedy. This is this growing concept in modern societies of zero death in an army, which is what the armies are looking for in the developed countries. And if you try to have zero death, that means that you try to destroy mainly the infrastructure and not people, because the value of life is growing with the growing value of wealth and GDP, and the growing value of life through the growing life expectancies. All that push towards the idea that there is a global trend towards trying to avoid wars in the future. But of course, all what I say here is unfortunately not totally true. because there have been a lot of reasons to believe that many other trends are pushing in the other direction, and that the world of today is more threatening than it used to be in the last decades. It is true that we have not seen wars in the last decades. I mean, global wars. We have seen regional wars, but not global wars. But a lot of dark clouds are coming around on our heads. The list is easy to make. First, the inequalities between rich and poor is growing more than ever. The wealth concentration in the world is higher than ever in mankind history. 1% of mankind own more than 65% of the poorest part of mankind, and this ratio is growing, which means that the world concentration of wealth is growing, and not only it is growing, but it is well known and better known through transparency of social media, which create that inequality is an element of frustration and revolts. Second, fundamentally, the global order, which was based on the architecture of international institutions at the end of the Second World War, doesn't work anymore. UN is very weak. All dispute settlement mechanisms are not in place. The international cooperation is weakening in all different fields. Nationalism is growing, and people believe that no global solution is possible and that each of us should find a solution locally. The market is global, but democracy is local. And this is the key in the future. We have a global market and we have local rule of law. And the global market leads to these growing inequalities, to a lot of unbalanced evolutions. And the lack of global rule of law leads to the fact that it's impossible to create the conditions of global coordination and cooperation. That leads a lot of people to believe that all solutions should be found within each nation, that we shouldn't care of the interest of the others, and it's only through looking from selfishness that we'll find a solution for us. We see that everywhere in the world where selfishness is seen as the core of a strategy for diplomacy. We see that in the US, we see that in UK, we see that in Brazil, we see that in India, we see that in China, we see that in many countries around the world. Let's take care only of my own interest and don't care of the others. Many other issues are coming that could also create enough frustration to trigger a new dimension for conflicts. One, of course, is the growing number of people on Earth. We were less than 3 billion during the Second World War. We are going to be 9 or 10. And this leads to huge imbalances in the use of natural resources, scarcity of resources, mainly scarcity of water, which may be in the future a very important cause for conflicts where water is not available, life is not available, and then, unfortunately, this lack of drinkable water or usable water is a key issue. Obviously, we don't know how to change it in the next 15 years or even 30 years. We have no solution available, and then we will have to live with less water per human being, much less water per human being, And this can create a lot of source of violence. These scarcities will come also for other resources, not oil, which is not scarce, but rare earth, different materials which are useful for new technologies, such cadmium, nickel, copper, and many others, are going to be a source of conflicts as they are today, because they are owned by a very small number of countries. China is one of them, and some African countries are some of them also. And this imbalance in ownership of rare resources of the future is also a source of problems. Climate change, which is also a fact, which is growing, is also creating a source of violence because climate change will create disorder in the way of life, movement of populations, and a lot of destruction of rule of law. Migration by itself is also a source of violence, not because migration has always been bad. Migration is a dimension of mankind, but when it is not well prepared, it can be a source. It has been, and it may be a source of violence. As we speak, there is only 250 million people living in another country than the country they were born. In 2050, it will be, according to all forecasts, more than 1 billion. And nobody knows how we can adjust to that. It's going to be a huge transformation with a lot of risks. There is also the fact that new technologies are creating new tools for violence. Of course, we still have a lot of violent tools, such as nuclear weapons, which are unfortunately still available and have not been destroyed. Not only they have not been destroyed, but we have seen the amazing declaration by the American president last week proposing to get out of the treaty that forbid the use of intermediary nuclear weapons, which used to be available both in Europe and in Asia, and which have been destroyed, dismantled, and forbidden by a treaty during the 80s between the Americans and the Soviets. And unfortunately, this treaty has just been denounced by the Americans, which opened the door for a new increase of nuclear weapons at a moment where we believe that they should be reduced. But also, new technologies are creating new weapons, and we should not forget that these new weapons could be nightmares. They exist both in nanotechnologies, in biochemical weapons, in AI, which is going to be a technology that will create new kind of weapons, autonomous weapons, and even weapons that can be used against the will of mankind, opening a lot of new doors for wars on purpose or not on purpose. And the use of AI combined with other kind of weapons, other kind of tools can be a disaster for mankind. Myself, I believe that one of the main risks of the next decade is the combination of AI and drones. Drones being a weapon of surgical precision that could be used to kill either specific persons or massive attack in the near future without any kind of answer. Nobody knows how to create a shield against massive attack by drones. This is just an example of new weapons which are coming. But I do think that the most important danger is the fact that all that is going to be within the framework of the weakening of democracy. I said that democracy is the core of the way we succeed to fight against war, because there is not a lot of example of wars between two democracies. And the fact that today we see with weakening of democracies and the birth of what I call national totalitarianism, what is called today by some people illiberal democracies, which is the beginning of switch from democracy to totalitarian regimes in a lot of countries where leaders have been elected democratically, but where they behave as dictators, taking into account the fact that people, their citizens, prefer security if they have a choice between security and freedom. And this is a very terrible danger. If you give a choice between security and freedom, and if people choose security, then you threaten democracy. It's very important to understand that there is no choice between freedom and security, but freedom is a dimension of security, and that we should fight for both. But today, the risk is to see the growth of national totalitarianism around the world, where countries will become less democracy, more selfish, less interested in finding cooperative solutions. And that can obviously trigger global conflict, because what is for sure known by experience and by theory is that totalitarian regimes cannot cooperate. Totalitarian regimes can only consider that the others are the enemies, because they are so selfish that they are not looking for alliance, except very cynical and local alliances, but they just look for themselves. And then the very real risk of the future is the development of nationalism, which can come through a simple economic protectionism, which is the first step toward nationalism and the first step towards national totalitarianism. Protectionism leads to nationalism, nationalism leads to war. That's a fact that unfortunately we learn from history. All that is in place today, and we see that as just the beginning. Of course, as I said before, it exists many elements of hope in technology, in culture, in global wealth, and in what I said before. But we have to realize that the dangers are there, and that all that can explode into a war, or global war, or local war at any minute. And we can, without a lot of imagination, think about a lot of scenarios of what kind of war, how a war can be triggered. It can be triggered by an incident in the sea between China and Japan, where the American and Chinese army can be in contact. It can be triggered by the moment where people will realize that North Korea has not get rid of his nuclear weapons, and then other countries would like to act against that. It can be triggered by the positioning of new nuclear weapons by the Americans in Poland after they have get rid of a treaty at